Welcome to Relative Mentality. I'm Jack,
I'm Joe.
and we are not here to be therapists. We are here to be family. And today we are giving the language on anxiety. Anxiety, for those who.
Anxiety. Sorry. Every time I think of it, I think of that song now. So
I mean, it's fun, unlike anxiety. Um,
you
so
don't enjoy your anxiety? You're not like, oh, yay, more anxiety. I was hoping I could pick some of that up at the store.
all I can think of is the vine of the kid who like unwraps the gift and he's like, avocado, thanks. But it's just like a gift from family and it's like, anxiety, thanks.
Thanks.
I'm like, between what you gave me genetically and then gave me mentally, thanks.
Thank you for all of this.
Yes.
And so we talked about this in the last episode, but what is anxiety? Where does it come from? So if we go to our very core, anxiety is in its most primal self. It is a means of protecting us, right? So when we used to be in the wild and there was a lion, we needed to learn about the lion, remember that the lion was there and is dangerous so we can access that information next time. We need to pass on the information about how dangerous lions are to our children and grandchildren so that they can survive. All of this comes from a place that makes sense. It's a thing that most, I'm not a zoologist, but I'm going to assume most animals have, right? That instinct of survival. And so anxiety was for our survival. Problem is, we are now these higher level sentient beings who most of us are pretty good at surviving at this point, or we're all right at it. We're doing it. We're surviving. We're out here. We're alive. We're still with each other. But we now live in a time and a place where we want to thrive. And anxiety and thriving, oh no, they are not friends. Anxiety is so good at protecting us and keeping us safe. But when we're actually trying to like enjoy our lives, no longer a helpful thing to have. So recognizing that anxiety is a normal part of life and is a normal reaction for people to have, it's when that anxiety becomes frequent and intense and persistent, and when it becomes fear, when it becomes crippling, that's when we go from, okay, this is healthy, typical anxiety to this is problematic anxiety. These thoughts are no longer just let's keep ourselves safe, but it's become thinking, spiraling thoughts about that email that your boss sent to you that really you're probably not going to die because of. Assumably, no one's dying because of an email from their boss, but I'm not here to tell anyone else's story.
It's interesting because, like we talked about last time, anxiety itself is, like you just said, very primal, but then with how it's kind of turned into somewhat what people experience today, it's very elusive almost because what causes me anxiety was different than what caused you anxiety. Even though
Yeah.
both of our stuff was like future dated, your partner's was like in the moment anxiety, and then I was realizing through talking, I was like, fuck, I got both. And you even said, hey, I also got both. But then it's like how it comes about in our lives and then how we deal with it. It's like, is it defined? Yeah, I'm sure that in medical books, when people become therapists and people become doctors, it's like therapy, blah, 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 blah. With how people experience it and how the experiences are so different, it almost from a person to a person, not necessarily a doctor or a therapist to a person, it's a little hard to define, I find, where it's
Yeah.
just like, and without the judgment, it's like, why is that giving you anxiety? And even that can be, without judgment from other people or even without judgment within our own brains. And so kind of taking an analytical standpoint, but then also making sure you don't spiral into overanalyzing it. And so, there is a lot of different things. So I'm very excited to kind of learn the more clinical, the more definitive and a relatively indefinite word, an experience. So,
Yeah, like you said, DSM-5, that's a diagnostic manual for therapists, psychologists.
oh, okay.
Or even if we look at the ICD-10, which is the medical diagnoses.
I was gonna
Throwing
say
out
this
all these
all sounds
terms.
like C3PO to me. This is like R2D2, C3PO. I was just like, I know these are real things, but they sound like robots.
It's part of the alphabet salad stuff, which always
Love it.
happens in this field. But there are specifics on what has to happen for us to be able to say, yes, this is diagnosable. That does
Mm.
not mean that your anxiety is not real or valid. It just might not hit all of those places. So, really, in the diagnostic world, there's also like generalized anxiety disorder, like that's the big one, or social anxiety disorder, or OCD, or separation anxiety. But there's also like anxiety unspecified, which is like you don't quite hit all of the markers to be able to say yes, or I don't have all the information at this point to be able to say, yes, this is 100% GAD, generalized anxiety disorder. So there's a whole spectrum and there's so much overlap. It's a lot, right? So I don't expect anyone to understand that part of it. And honestly, at the end of the day, like no matter what you come in with, if it's social anxiety, generalized anxiety, whatever, that isn't necessarily going to have a huge difference on how it gets treated and how you make progress and how you move forward, because it all sort of comes back to the same thing. I mentioned about talk therapy and CBT, which is what you and I discuss mostly when we say therapy. And so that's going to look the same for any of those anxiety disorders. Okay, maybe there's tweaks and things when we modify in ways to change it, but like you having a diagnosis doesn't change your symptoms. I'm more focused on what your symptoms are and how do we treat those than being like, here's a diagnosis and this is how we treat that, because it's not going to work the same for everyone.
I'm going to do a marginal sidebar to that though,
Yeah,
because
please.
I understand what you're saying, but I will say like on the patient side and on like the person side, something I completely forgot to talk about last time. Growing up, I would like pull out my
Mm,
hair, and growing up, there was no language around it. It was just a bad habit, just like chewing
mm,
your nails, all of that. Then I got in college the phrase trichotillomania, and I was like, oh, this isn't just a bad habit. This is something
yeah.
that comes out of anxiety. And so it's like, I understand from like a therapist perspective, let's look at the symptoms, but absolutely, I'm like giving something a name so that it's not a, and I know this is not good to talk about in regards to mental illness, but it's like, I'm not crazy. It's
Yeah.
there is something that other
Yeah.
people experience. It even has a word for it. And so that's why
Oh,
I
yeah.
love that we're doing the whole giving the language for everything, because there are things that like I have experienced that I felt isolated in or I felt whatever, and then I was given a word. So that in particular, I just kind of want to put that in there where it's like labels can be bad, but labels can be good. And so it's like,
Well,
and not just to you, but to everybody. Like that's
no, like
to all listening.
100%, 100%. And that's the thing when it comes to those labels, like you said, it can help us feel like, okay, now I understand. I loved getting my diagnosis. I was like, now I get it. But like some people can feel confined by a diagnosis
Yes.
or can feel like overwhelmed by a diagnosis. So, like specifically with like ADHD, a lot of people come in and they're like, I don't know, I might have some ADHD, like I have other problems too, or whatever. And I always tell people, like, if you want to go and do a neuropsych evaluation and get an official ADHD diagnosis, and that's going to help you feel better to be able to say, yes, I am neurodivergent, I have this issue, please go and do. But if you're just looking to get support for it, and you don't really need that or want that, or it might even feel limiting to you, then like don't waste your time and money to go get this official diagnosis that's not going to change what we're doing as far as working on the skills to combat the symptoms. So yes, why we're doing this, sometimes having the language can be so amazing and can be so freeing and so normalizing, but recognizing that at the end of the day, some of those things are just to help us be able to conceptualize it, and not necessarily because our treatment is going to look so different or where we go from this point in our progress is going to look amazingly different. So I think that, yeah, that's an excellent point. And there's a lot of overlap too, which can be confusing and ways that it turns out. I'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about kids, because one thing we have to remember is that the way anxiety looks in adults and the way anxiety looks in children is very different.
I know what it looks like for me, but with it being such an amorphous concept to some degree, because anxiety hits everybody so differently, like what is kind of the definitive in something that isn't definitive? So
Oh,
please
wow.
expand.
Please expand. Well, I mean, it is complicated because it does look so different for different people. So I think where a lot of people start with is thinking about the intrusive thoughts, the thoughts that just keep coming even though we don't want to engage with them, the thoughts that are in our head spiraling, they're in the echo chamber getting bigger and bigger and bigger and overtaking us. That's a pretty classic way to think about anxiety, is this voice inside our heads that's sort of just like, but what if, but what if, and if we do that, and if we do that, again, thinking of Inside Out, what they have there is anxiety, the little character, perfect representation of sort of those basics that we think about. But it can also be like just feeling nervous, feeling restless, feeling tense. Maybe you're feeling worried or feeling fear about impending danger, or like a panic about something that's happening, trouble concentrating, difficulty controlling your worry, having the urge to avoid things that are triggering. Those are all sort of pieces that come with it. And when we talk about more physical, maybe we're talking about the rapid breathing, sweating, trembling, feeling weak or tired. It's too much.
Miss Teacher, I have a
Yeah.
question.
Yeah. Oh God, what?
Because no, 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 no. To some degree, this is kind of what these episodes are, is kind of you
Yeah.
giving the language and then me trying to fucking understand it. But you mentioned something about triggers, and it's
Yeah,
like
please.
obviously knowing what triggers a person is always ideal, to know what triggers you so that you don't ultimately throw yourself into situations that would be negatively impacting you. But
Yeah.
to what it sounded like you were saying is that to some degree, there can be unnecessary, feels like the wrong word, but that's all that's coming right now. It's like unnecessary anxiety around avoiding triggers. And so it's like, what is the difference between like potentially a valid trying to not have a trigger and an invalid? And I know that our whole point is everything is valid, but it's like, you know what I'm trying to say? Or what I'm trying
Yeah.
to.
Well, I guess it would be sort of thinking maybe about like, is the thing we're doing necessary? Or is the anxiety preventing us from doing things that are living our everyday sort of
Okay,
lives, right? So
absolutely.
if there is a rickety bridge by your house that has like collapsed twice and you're like, I'm not going over that bridge. Fair. Fair enough. You have lots of logical reasons why not to. If you just refuse to cross any bridge, like any bridge that goes over water, you don't use bridges. So you are like landlocked in your town because you can't, you're like stuck in New York and you can never leave Staten Island forever because you can't go over bridges. But that's when it starts to get, can we really go our whole life and not use bridges? Sure. But are we having to adjust our entire lives to avoid a bridge just so we never go over a bridge? Then that's a problem.
Okay.
Did that sort of
No,
answer
that
your
makes
question?
that makes sense because it's like, so in a very funny thing, I guess. I
Yeah.
fucking hate tunnels. I would assume, a traumatic experience as a kid in a tunnel. But as long as I can see the end or relative light or traffic keeps moving, I'm fine. But the moment I'm stuck, oh, I don't like it. I don't, but I don't also keep myself, if I know that that's the way I have to go, I just kind of accept it and move on. But I do know that there are people that experience phobias and things of that nature that they're just like, I can't, like, to one end of the spectrum, there are the people that like, I forget what it's called, but like they can't leave the house because they have like
Agor-
such a fear.
agoraphobia.
Yes. And it's like, thank God for things like Uber Eats and like delivery
Yeah.
services for groceries like that. Prior to that, their family members had to bring them food or whatever. I would assume something very traumatic caused them to have that happen.
Right.
But that makes a lot of sense of like being cognizant of triggers. Because there are things in life where it's like I said, even tunnels or whatever, where it's like, yeah, I don't like it, but I'll deal with it.
Right.
This shit makes me uncomfy. Even thinking about it, like my hands are starting to get fidgety because I'm just like, don't like tunnels. And I used to have a major arachnophobia. I don't know
Yeah.
if this is getting too off topic, but literally, I would have panic attacks if there was a spider in my room like hyperventilating. I would literally freeze in place and I could not do anything. But I had something happen in my life that now I just don't like them and I can now much more deal with them. But I also learned that they just exist and that's okay.
Mm,
Anyways,
yeah.
sorry, I'm
No,
squirrely.
no,
Please,
that's
please
perfect.
continue. But it was one of those things that definitely popped in my head where I was like, oh, that's interesting because triggers are big. They're called
Yeah.
triggers for a reason. So that's good to kind of know the difference.
Well, and keeping in mind everything is a spectrum, right? So our
Hmm.
anxious reactions look like that spectrum too. Is it something that we sort of just acknowledge and go, ugh, not my favorite? Is it something that I'm like, okay, I really don't like, but I can handle? Or is it something where it's like, no, no way, cannot handle, cannot do it all? But I'm glad you sort of talked about panic attacks because that's sort of the next place I was going to go a little bit was what sort of physical reactions can come with anxiety. And so if you feel comfortable, I'd love to hear like what happens to you when you have a panic attack physically. If you feel
Sure.
uncomfortable, it's okay.
No, 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 no. So I'll give the one that I had that was the most extreme one I've ever had. I was like a preteen at the time. I was at a friend's house and I was like, we were spending the night and like I was upset about something. So I like kind of started to pretend to cry and then I just couldn't stop. And it got to the point where it was starting to get hard for me to breathe. And like it just, I was hyperventilating, but I didn't know what that was then. Because again, at this point, I'm like 12 years old. And oddly enough, my friend's dad, where we were staying, he was a nurse. So he was somewhat aware of what was happening. And so he was trying to get me, at the time I was on the ground, they got me onto the couch. He tried to give me like a paper bag to like blow in and out of. And the way that I explained it, because my body was literally like my arms were against the back and like on the seats, and my legs were just draped over, and I was kind of like this. I was getting to the point where I couldn't breathe. And the way I explained it is that it feels like an elephant was sitting on top of me. Like
Mm,
I couldn't move my limbs. I
mm,
couldn't breathe. Like I was literally as paralyzed as mentally as I could be. Like I said, I couldn't move anything. At one point they like tried
mm,
to get me to like sit forward or and I just couldn't move my head. I couldn't move anything. And they ended up calling an ambulance and I don't remember getting into the ambulance because I blacked out because I had just stopped breathing. And so I came to in the back of the ambulance because they had the oxygen mask over my face. But it's like, I literally don't remember being put on the stretcher to be taken out. Like I just that's all gone. And so again, that therapist I did not like. She was the one who made me feel like a lab rat. She was like, well, most people never experience that in their whole lifetime. I was like, great, this horrifying, terrifying experience. People
oh,
will never be able to relate to me because no one else has ever experienced this. Fantastic. I was like, already, preteen, I'm already feeling weird and alone because of hormones. And then I have all this other personal family stuff happening and then this is happening on top of it. So that's the most extreme that I've experienced. As an adult now, a lot of the panic attacks that I have gotten, because I have had that extreme one as a kid, I'm able to recognize it more, which I know is great with
mm,
patterns with anxiety. And the great thing is, my partner has now seen anxiety and because I know there's a difference and we will get to that. Try to remind you to explain the difference between an anxiety and panic attack because I know they are different, but I'll either be hyperventilating and it is one of those things where it's literally my breath will go, or like very shallow, very fast. And oftentimes I'll be crying, which exacerbates the issue.
yeah.
They don't even have to necessarily be sad moments or things of that nature that
Mm,
made me that way. And then because I'm hyperventilating, my body will then start to tingle because it is then starting to become numb. And luckily, like I said, I have a partner who has helped me with like grounding or like the 5 4 3 2 1 or counting, and I've been able to get out of those things. But that is often how those look like to me now. And sometimes it can even be where I'm talking aloud, and because of my anxiety and I'm mentally spiraling, I'm saying these words out loud, and they even sound crazy or they sound extreme, and then I just keep, I know it sounds crazy, but, and then there's like a
mm.
stuttering to it as well. And so then that also is where it kind of comes in. So, Hopefully that was not too
Yeah.
much rambling.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you touched on some of the really common ones, which is breathing rapidly or hyperventilation, increased heart rate, that like trembling, shaking because your whole body is feeling it. We should also keep in mind that when we are feeling anxious, our body gets flooded with adrenaline, cortisol. And so, because we're not running from a lion or fighting a lion in these situations, there's not really anywhere for that to go.
Mhm.
And so it's just sort of sitting in our body. So those chemicals are going through our body. And that's why we're trembling. That's why we're shaking, because we're full of adrenaline that has nowhere to go. That's why maybe our limbs are feeling heavier, why our heart is beating faster, why our breath is coming so rapidly. Like that is also part of it. Not to say there aren't other ways that we spiral into those, like the thought process is still part of it. I think it's also important to remember that it's not just in the moment symptoms,
Mm.
physical symptoms either. We're just dealing with a lot of stress and anxiety. Maybe you're having gastrointestinal issues, GI issues. Maybe you're having trouble sleeping. Did we just touch? Did I just touch
Yes,
you
I
there?
was just like, IBS is a real son of a bitch. I be
Yes,
shitting.
yes, yes. um Not being able to sleep, trouble with focus and
Mm.
concentration, your body just not feeling right, whatever that may be. So people who are struggling with really severe anxiety often have physical issues that they're having as well, that are not necessarily always going to be a one-to-one of like, yes, it is definitely just anxiety that is causing this, but that anxiety can be worsening physical symptoms that we already have, bringing on new physical symptoms, all sorts of stuff.
And I was gonna say too, on top of what you were saying as well, where it like, or maybe just saying it slightly different, maybe my brain's processing it
Nope,
differently, but it's
please.
often I find like that shit can compound, where it's
Mm,
like, I am not sleeping well because I'm thinking a lot because I'm anxious about something at work or I'm anxious about something coming up. And it's
yeah,
like, I'm not sleeping well, which means I'm already tired. So then I'm more achy. So then I'm thinking, okay, am I getting sick? Or, yeah. And then it's like, and then I'm still thinking during the day about this thing. And so then I'm shitting all over the place. Not really, but like, I like my stomach is just in knots. But then that means I don't want to eat food because I'm not hungry. My stomach
yeah.
is like, I'm just nauseous. And so then I'm again feeling physically even more worse. And then because of the anxiety of our family, I then am like, how many health problems do I have? Like I know, and I have told doctors, like I literally have had lists where I'm like, I'm going to give you everything that I think is wrong. You tell me if any of this needs to be worried about, or if it's just, and so the latest doctor I had was literally, he's like, some people are just really in tune to their bodies. I said, okay. I was like, I understand I could potentially be a hypochondriac. Lord knows we have one in the family that isn't me. So,
That
yeah.
could be it too, right? We can have what are called psychosomatic symptoms. So that's when you have a physical illness or ailment that's caused by something mental. So that they can become like a paraplegic, be like, my legs do not work and they cannot walk. And it is nothing physical. It is because of such extreme stress. And this is probably in a situation where there's more trauma happening, but
Mm.
that can still happen where our mental health is so disrupted, is so dysregulated that we have nothing to do with it but to like kind of send it into our body and start having physical manifestations of what's happening inside our brain.
Well, I mean, our brains are extremely, like, they are dumb, as we've said now multiple times, but there is an amazing aspect of them as well, where it's like, it is because of our brains that we feel pain. Our brains control a lot of what we have, and they are more powerful than we even realize. Like, they are literally keeping me alive right now because they're helping me breathe in and out without me having to fucking think about it. They're like, we got you, fam. We're good. Like, your lungs will go in and out. We've got that covered. And I think that's another thing that can kind of be dysregulating in regards to like panic attacks and whatnot, is it's like it then takes something that I never have to think about and puts it to the forefront of my brain.
Mm,
Where it's like
yeah.
I'm currently already thinking about this report that I have to do, or this meeting that I have, and I'm already stressed about this, or I'm already concerned about that, and now I'm spiraling. Fuck, now I have to breathe. And now I have to think about that, but also think about these other things. And like that can just be so like putting me off kilter, which then makes it worse.
Yeah, absolutely. And this sort of makes me think a little bit about something we were talking about last time, but is like how our anxiety is meant to be helpful is by trying to protect us and give us warning signs and help us. It helps us by making assumptions, right? So that would be like, there's a lion. I assume that lion is going to eat me, so I need to run. I am making an assumption about that. We had to make those assumptions to keep ourselves safe, to protect ourselves. But now there's a lot of what we call cognitive distortions, which are basically ways your brain is trying to protect you, but is actually really unhelpful, or is ways that your brain is trying to interpret the information that it receives from the world or how it interacts with the world. So, like an example of that would be all or nothing thinking, black or white thinking, thinking everything is either it's good or it's bad. There's no in between. Mind reading, assuming what you know what other people are thinking or feeling, which I think we talked about that last time, something we definitely do to try to be like anticipate how they're going to feel to, control or to influence how we're going to act. Catastrophizing, so blowing things out of proportion, going immediately to that worst case scenario with something. Should thinking, like I should do this, I should do that. And if I don't do that, then I am bad or wrong or whatever.
Mm.
Overgeneralizing, fortune telling, like I know what the future is going to have in store, thinking that we're in control, the control fallacy, like assuming you can control everything that happens in your life. And we can't. And again, anxiety is so much about sort of trying to find control and places to feel in control. And we really have to sort of accept our lack of control. I always go to the serenity prayer that they use in AA. I'm sure we've all heard it in a movie or some other place. I hope I say it right. God, grant me the serenity to
Mm.
accept the things I cannot change, the strength to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. That sort of idea of accepting that there is things that we cannot be in control of, that things are not going to look exactly the way we planned out 3 days ago when we planned out how this entire day was going to look. So challenging places where we need to challenge ourselves to have that flexibility and let go of the control is a big struggle for people who have anxiety, which kind of leads me into the kids and how that looks different. Because think about it, when you're a kid, what do you really have control over? Like,
Nothing.
yeah, not
At
anything.
least, at least my growing up.
Maybe your physical body to some extent,
Mm.
maybe like your personal space to some extent, like your bedroom or your toys. And so anxiety is us wanting to take control. For kids, they have very few things that they can really take control over.
Mhm.
So it looks different in kids, and we see more things that look like compulsive behaviors. So things that look like OCD. I've met a lot of people who are like, yeah, I might have OCD because when I was a kid, I did this. I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, well, when you were a kid, what else did you have control over? Is it really that have an obsessive or a compulsive disorder? Or is it just that you had a very limited space to express that stuff in? And my great example for that is always, okay, you're going to find out what an anxious, weird kid I was. My stickers. So I would take the stickers out of whatever sticker book they were in. And I had a special sticker notebook, and I would take them and put them all very neatly within my sticker notebook. And then I would take the outer sticky part that was like around the actual stickers, and that would also go into my notebook. So I just transfer everything off of the page I got it from into the pages in my notebook. But I knew my stickers will never get dirty and gross and whatever, because I'm not even going to use them in the real world. I'm just going to put them straight into my notebook where they are safe and they are clean and I have control over them, as opposed to putting it on my backpack where it'll get dirty or maybe it'll peel off or somebody could take it and all of those things. So I was trying to exert control over a very limited amount of things that I had control over. As we talked about in past episodes, my Barbies all had to be dressed when they went back into the toy box when we were done playing with them. That was something that was very important to me because it was controlling my world and my space. Even when we think of kids who have like selective mutism, so kids who don't talk. Oh, did I bring
Oh,
you a new
okay.
one? So
You
selective
did.
mutism, yeah, it's when kids are not physically incapable of talking, but they have a mental block that keeps them from talking. Usually the only people they speak to, if they speak to anyone, is like mom and dad or whoever their guardian, the person they feel safe with. But everyone else in the world, they do not speak to. Here's another dwelling example. I don't think I had anything that was, I didn't do it enough that I would say that it was selective mutism. But I used to do that in public sometimes where, I'd be like in the bathroom by myself and someone would walk in and just like act like I couldn't hear them and they'd leave me alone. So it's like finding that way to be protective. Not exactly selective mutism, but like taking control over what I could control, which was my own voice in those moments when I was in situations where I felt uncomfortable with other people and like keeping that to myself. And it's not to say that all of the ways kids show look like that. Also, when we see kids acting out a lot, especially if like they're good all day at school and then they come home and they act out a ton. Well, maybe it's because all day at school they were masking and trying to handle it. And there's enough rules at school that they were able to sort of keep everything inside and balance. But when they come home, there's no structure or the structure looks different or they just feel safe enough to be their authentic selves and now they're acting out and being loud or not listening or whatever those things look like. So again, looking at it in kids looks really different from sort of the way we think of for, preteen teens on through adulthood when we do start to have more things in our life that we can actually exert our anxiety on. Great, healthy.
It's funny going back to the compulsion thing though, because that's what I had thought I had for a stint of time as a kid. Because back in the day, my mom had a tension rod for the shower curtain, and I always had to have four on one side, four on the other. It always had to do that. And I was like, I have OCD. And it's like, I have to do like certain things. And then hearing that, it's like, well, what did you have control over? And it's like, nothing. Okay, so that's not because people would be like, well, that's not OCD, and then leave it at that. I'm like, okay, great. Then what is it? And now I just pull the shower curtain. It's not a big deal, but that's because I have plenty of other things that I can do to,
Right.
handle
Plenty other
shit.
stuff to worry about.
Right.
Absolutely. So that's all sort of to say, like, this is what anxiety is. I just want to check in with you, Jack. Like, is there anything that I didn't touch on that you're like wondering about, or any other questions or things that you wanted to bring to the table today?
This is going to be something about myself that I don't know if you know or whatever, but you'll find out. So something that kind of started, I think I mentioned it a little bit earlier, like as a kid, was trichotillomania, which is hair pulling, skin picking, things of that nature, which is around anxiety. But when I was in my early 20s, obviously there's more things that I can be in control of because I'm outside of the house. I'm living my adult life, but then there's also a lot more things that feel out of control.
Yeah.
And so, unfortunately, something that came with that, with the anxiety and the lack of control that I felt between anxiety and depression, was then self-harm.
Yeah.
Because there are some things with the skin picking and whatnot and the hair pulling that actually feels really good. And I don't know how to explain
Mm.
it to someone who does not understand that. And, it can be one of those things where when you feel out of control, self-harm is something that gives you control.
Yeah.
And to try to explain that to somebody who would have no desire to do such a thing is like, so hurting yourself is the better alternative. And I'm like, fucking clearly not. However, it makes me feel better.
Yeah.
And so when I would do it, everyone around me knew I was not being great to myself. But it was one of those things that the people around me when someone is doing something of that nature, there is a caution that you, when you're around those people, to make sure that you don't exacerbate the situation.
Mm.
And so there's a trepidation that has to go around it. And that's what's tricky is, anxiety and depression can kind of go hand in hand.
Oh
There
yeah.
are times where they're absolutely like besties. And so, especially with great sadness and great, physical pain, and that it doesn't have to be with, losing a limb or anything like that. It doesn't have to be an actual wound, just physical aching pain due to crippling anxiety that's led into
Mm.
depression or things of that nature. There are coping mechanisms that aren't great. Same with substance abuse, whether it's alcohol or drugs. It's one of those things that, like with anxiety and depression, if you feel like you're out of control, you're self-medicating,
Yeah.
and because there is a stoicism, let's just say, from where we're from, but also the I don't want to be a burden and burden people with this. I'ma just do these things.
Yeah.
And one could argue not the healthiest of coping mechanisms.
Could we argue that? Is that something we
Could
can
could
argue?
argue. Could argue. Just because it's common doesn't mean it's great. Like that's
Just because it's normalized doesn't mean it's healthy.
right, right. And so I just kind of wanted to bring that up as well because I know that you could consider it being acting out or things of that nature because it's definitely not
Mm.
par for the course of like what to do. But it's like
Hmm.
when you feel like there's nothing else you can do, that's when you can get into these really not great coping mechanisms. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on how to handle your intrusive thoughts.
I just want to say, you're totally right. It's like scratching a bug bite that's so itchy, right? It feels so good in the moment, but it ultimately just makes it worse and maybe even like scratches it open and is actually really harmful to you, or you can get an infection. It's the same relief and feeling people generally get when it comes to whatever form of self-harm there could be. And we should really try to think of a time to talk more about what that can look like too, because it's not always what we think of traditionally. There can be ways that restriction can be a form of self-harm, ways
Mm.
that depriving yourself of things can be self harm, or requiring yourself to do stuff that is not healthy or helpful because it's the right thing to do or whatever, that can also end up showing up in very similar ways to self harm. But I feel like that's got to be a bigger as a
I
bigger
was
convo that we have today. So yeah, so self harm can look like restriction. It can look like overindulgence when we're talking about substance use, and everywhere in between. And those are sort of the unhealthy ways to cope with and handle your intrusive thoughts, to handle your overall anxiety. So I want us to talk about some healthy ways, some good things that you can do that might be a little bit more helpful. In the last episode, you talked about using grounding techniques,
Mhm.
which is great. For those who don't know, grounding is basically just sort of like being reconnected with your body, being reconnected to the moment, to the present, to the actual space that you're in. When we start to have those intrusive thoughts and they're spiraling, we get very caught up in the echo chamber in our brain. And sometimes we just need to be reconnected and rooted, grounded to what's happening in the here and now instead of wherever we may have floated off to. So doing things with our sensory awareness, like the 5 4 3 2 1, where you're focusing on what can I see, what can I hear, what can I smell, even doing those just on their own outside of that activity, sort of saying like, I'm going to look around the room and find everything I can find that's a rectangle, right? And I'm going to really focus on that, or I'm going to count the tiles in the ceiling. I'm really going to put my energy and focus into that. Another way is like mental exercises can also be grounding in that way, because our anxiety is like, ah, and sort of shouting. But then if we challenge ourselves to a mental exercise, like say counting back from 100 by sevens, or remembering all the birthdays of your immediate family, we're like challenging our brain to really think about stuff. And there becomes a point where we have to look away from the anxiety, stop focusing on the anxiety just to be able to do the mental math you're challenging yourself to do, or to recall the information that you're challenging yourself to. And since I keep using this word challenge, I want to talk about challenging your inner bully real quick. My personal Gmail, the little picture for me is not a picture of myself, it's a brain, and it says, "Your anxiety is a lying bitch." And I could not agree anymore. She means well, but she's lying. She's bringing up stuff that doesn't even need to be brought up. And sort of thinking of it as like our inner bully, the person that's gonna give us the most shit because they're hurt or they're dealing with something themselves. So if we think about how do you deal with a bully, you kind of have to starve the bully, right? Stop giving them our energy, stop giving them our reactions, stop letting them get something out of it. At first, yeah, your bully is just going to double down and try to mess with you more, but eventually they're going to get tired of not getting a reaction, because the reaction's what feeds them. The reaction is what inspires them to keep going and pushes them forward. And that can sort of be the same with our anxiety. If we start to starve it, if we're not giving it the attention, if we're, sort of, we say maybe like turn the channel on it, right? Turn the page, then we can slowly get it so it doesn't bother us or attack us quite as much.
Do have a question on that though.
Yeah.
If you could explain how to do that without disassociating. Because
Yes,
I'm like, I can
absolutely.
disassociate like a motherfucker, but I'm pretty sure that's not what you mean. So, because I'm
So
like, yeah, I'll just not exist. I'll just zone.
right. So, like, disassociation or depersonalization, that's when we sort of leave our bodies, leave the here and now, and our brain takes us to like a different place where it's safe and where we're not interacting with it. When we're trying to challenge our bully, we have to be intent. I think it's about intentionality at the end of the
Okay.
day. I think that's the key to a lot of the skills that are going to go with challenging anxiety is, are we choosing to do it, or are we just like autopiloting into it? So if we're autopiloting into, we are not even here and participating, versus sort of saying, hey, anxiety, see you, done with you, bye. I'm going to put my focus and my energy over here. I'm being intentional about moving my focus from the anxiety to something that feels better for us, something that we can handle, whatever the strategy is, versus we're just sort of facing away from it and floating away into nothingness that we have kind of no control over.
Okay, so then this popped up in a
Yeah.
different way and kind of goes into like a different point, but it's like with trying to starve and ignore the bully, you can do like distractions and be like, okay, I'm going to focus my energy here instead. But I know you said, and I have experienced this where at that point, then the anxiety gets louder. It then is like, well, obviously you're doing this because you don't want to deal with X, Y, and Z. Like, I get so much cleaning or so many things done when there's another thing I don't want to do. There is, and I'm just like, that's the thing is for me, those distractions work in that time because I can literally just put my energy and just focus on that. But then when it's done, my anxiety is like, and I'm here, I'm back. Hi. You were thinking about something else temporarily, but now you've wasted all of this time. You could have just been working on this other thing. How does that feel? And so, please help, is what I'm asking. Where I'm just like,
Yeah, I mean, again, that's sort of a natural reaction, is the avoidance of it. And I guess that's the difference between, yeah, I have to be like being intentional between choosing a distraction and just trying to avoid it. So I think when we're choosing a distraction, when we're starving the bully, there's almost a part of us that's like recognizes the anxiety and makes the choice not to be with it. Right.
okay.
So in your example, like you do a bunch of stuff and then you come back to it and your anxiety is like, well, you could have just done this thing that you were supposed to do in the beginning, trying to maybe change our focus to be on, okay, yeah, we didn't do that. And I recognize it. Hey, thanks, anxiety, for bringing that back to our attention, making sure I remember I got it. However, here's all the things I did do today. And yeah, it might not have been the thing I said, but like, here's how I did do it. Here's how I did crush it. Or for instance, if you're feeling anxious about school or something and saying like, okay, anxiety, we can talk about this later. Like maybe we can come back to it, or maybe we're just turning the channel like full stop and being like, we are not doing this today. So it's still having that recognition of it, not trying to pretend it's not there. Well, I mean, that came out wrong because you are kind of trying to pretend it's not there. But like
But
you
and
still have that moment of acknowledgement of it and that active turning away.
because I think that's where my brain is kind of hung up on the situation is it's like in my head what I'm hearing is ignore but don't, but ignore. And so I'm like, what if it's more a shunning where it's like, I know you're there, but I'm not
Yeah.
going to talk to you.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
that's versus because in my head, ignore is like full stop, turn away, you don't exist, like object permanence almost.
Mhm.
Whereas if I and again, I know that sometimes, again, because brains are weird, this could be exactly what you're saying, but my brain did not register
No,
it until I
please.
put it in my words. But it seems like it's like a literal, I'm going to put up a fence or I'm going to put up a window. I can see you, but I'm not going to talk to you. I am
Yeah.
done with you. And
Mhm.
like, and so when they come back and they like roll the window down or whatever, it'd be like, no, we're done. Like, I'm not dealing with you.
If you can learn to cancel your thoughts, to go no contact with your anxiety, which again, this is what I'm saying. There's a finite amount of skills. It's just finding like how it works and how it's transferable.
That's amazing. Yeah, just go no
Yeah.
contact with my anxiety. And it's just like,
Honestly, I really like that, and I think I'm going to start using that.
well, and it's one of those things too where there is nuance because everything with mental health is nuance because like we've mentioned before, some anxiety is good. Like,
Mhm.
seeing some pattern recognition in a previous ex that didn't treat you well and you're starting to see some of those negative things pop back up. That can protect you. That is your modern day lion.
Yeah.
Or even, toxic workplaces. Obviously, the economy is hard and life is hard right now, but one of the first jobs that I ever had, there was a very toxic work environment. And then when I started
Mhm.
seeing that after my next company was bought and things were starting to happen, I could recognize, okay, this makes me feel uncomfy, not in a growth sort of way, but in an anxiety sort of way. I'm not sure if my job is safe. Let's look elsewhere. There are
Mhm.
moments where it can be knowledgeable and it can be helpful, but yeah, just I think it's like recognizing when it's the spiraling one, where it's
Right.
like there is nothing. If I can have a conversation with my anxiety and I can understand it, and yeah, let's have that conversation. But if it's literally you just going like
Yeah.
this, then I'm gonna be like, no, we can't do this. And I'm shutting off the phone. I'm not doing this
Yeah.
anymore.
I often say that, like, you can sort of be like, hey, thanks for your concern. Like, thank you so much for bringing that concern to the table. We're dealing with it, we're working on it, and like, sort of, quiet it down. But yeah, like, we have to acknowledge its existence. We can't just pretend it's not happening at all. We have to acknowledge its existence and then choose to change in what our next step is. So this is something that's also been sort of flowing around my brain, which helps with this is we talked previously about the idea of when we are kids, anxiety sort of being hardwired into us, and also the primal aspect of it, the part of that we're literally born with. And so I always think of that as like our programming. That's the stuff that happened before we knew who we wanted to be. That was genetics, our environment, the world teaching us who we're supposed to be, right? And so that's our automatic thoughts and feelings. We don't have control over them. And the same with anxiety. Like it is an automatic thought, it is an automatic feeling. We don't have control over them, over those things that come up automatically, but we do have control over what we do next. And that is the person we want to be. So this automatic thoughts and feelings are programming. What we do next is who we are, who we want to be, what we're trying to do with our lives, and where we're trying to move from. So the anxiety, the thought, it comes. Hey, great. Thank you so much. Glad you could stop by. Thanks for the warning. Appreciate all of that. But now like I have to do what's right for me. and what's right for my own mental health and for moving forward from this place, right? So again, there's the acknowledgement and the awareness that it exists, but then the choice to not live in that automatic place.
It makes sense. It really does. There's not much I can add. Like it's like after I had that
Yes.
breakthrough, I'm like, whoo, all right, and I feel good. Because it's one of those things, and I'm sure you've had that personally, where it's like when you have a breakthrough and it's just like I need to be with this for a moment. And it is something that I'm gonna have to kind of sit with and
Yeah.
really think on. And I know that's kind of the whole thing, is like being intentional with your thoughts and your feelings. And it's like I just want to thank you for kind of like working with me and kind of coming up with this together, because that's a lot, but in a great way.
I think that's going to just become my goal from here on out, is to make you have a breakthrough every time.
And now I feel horrible because I'm like, I've been going to therapy for years, and it's not like I have bad therapists. The therapists I've had for the most part have been great.
It's not your therapist not doing a good job that this breakthrough
Right.
didn't come in a session. It's that you guys are working on foundational pieces or how to fill in the cracks as they are happening. And this is more of a like a moment where that just sort of clicks for you. And that happens because you just got to hear it the right way from the right person at the right time, and it'll just click. And that does not always happen in therapy because we are maybe really focused on one thing or another thing, and it's having conversations about mental health or seeing what other people are doing or hearing what other people's therapists say. Those are the moments where sometimes it just clicks because you're like, oh, now I heard the right metaphor that has made it so it's something that I totally get. And so any therapist worth their salt knows we're setting you up for breakthroughs, not necessarily saying you're going to have the breakthrough here in this very moment.
I would agree.
Yeah.
I mean, don't get me wrong. There have been bangers
No.
that my therapist has given
Oh,
me that
I'm
I'm
sure.
like, and then she'll go to say something else. I'm like, no, no, hold on a minute. I need you to just pause, because I was like, oof, hold on. And so, but that's
But this is a great opportunity for, it's not just for us to have breakthroughs, but for hopefully people who are listening to also have those moments and be like, oh, now I understand that, or something has been explained in a way that makes it easier for me to know, which is why I keep encouraging people out there in the world to engage with us, like comment, like subscribe, but comment, let us know what works for you, what doesn't work for you, follow up questions, because we're not going to have time to go through everything that happens to every single person in the world. So hearing feedback from our listeners slash viewers can really be helpful in informing us of what else we need to share, or just giving us a space to share additional information that we didn't necessarily think of when we were recording.
or even like the
Because,
breakthroughs that you've had in regards to
yeah,
like that. Like, it'd be like,
absolutely.
I didn't vibe with this, but you know what? This sounds a lot like this. And then a different person could read that comment and be like, no, that comment makes
Yes,
sense.
please
So
share all of
chit
your
chat.
metaphors with me.
Yeah, this is
I,
all a conversation.
it's all a conversation because life is hard, but talking about mental health shouldn't be.
Oh shit, we weren't recording. Fuck.
Are you being serious?
No, we're recording.